Yes, good afternoon. It is good afternoon, isn't it? It's almost 20 past one here on MOTH News Live. My name is Keith Walsh, and yeah, we're here just for a surprise Monday afternoon live. Hope it's sunny where you are. It certainly is where I am, and it's going to be absolutely amazing weather for the whole summer. So relax, it's here to stay. Um, now, today I'm joined by the voice behind PolitiCorey. He's on YouTube, he's on TikTok. He is a political commentator who's trying to bring something rare to the internet these days, some honest, respectful, and nuanced political debate. At a time when outrage and misinformation dominate our feeds, Corey's approach is to cut through the noise, steel manning arguments rather than straw manning, challenging assumptions without slipping into tribalism, calling for better discourse across the political divide. We'll be talking about the role misinformation plays in our politics and society, especially in the wake of some disturbing and false stories that went viral online in Ireland last week, including conspiracy theories about the tragic death of Garda Kevin Flatley and a completely unverified claim of a kidnapping in Drogheda. We'll also touch on a more awkward but important question about political gatekeeping and media access after Ruth Coppinger refused to answer a question from a Gript journalist. That's something I haven't told Corey I might ask him about, so I hope he's okay with that. Corey, how are you?
Very well, Keith. Thank you very much for having me on this wonderful day.
Yeah, it is. I know. I'm just going to play this clip here because I know this is the thing you were talking about. I mentioned to you the kidnapping, so you're probably not all over that story, but it's in the same vein, really.
In episode
Let's just have a look at this
762 of why
first.
social media and the internet were a huge mistake, here's an article from the Journal saying Garda hit out at completely inaccurate misinformation shared online about death of Garda Kevin Flatley. This is referencing the guard that was killed on the motorway while operating a speed checkpoint by a motorcycle, sadly, last week. And the story references a social media post seen hundreds of thousands of times made claims about the circumstances leading up to the Garda's death.
So we don't need to watch all of that. I'm sure you're enjoying watching yourself. But just for the
I hate
people,
it, but it's fine.
Yeah.
You didn't warn me ahead of time that I'd have to watch myself speak.
That's why I didn't tell you. I've been doing stuff like this for well over 20 years, and I still don't like the sound of my own voice. So, yeah, get used to not getting used to it. So let's go back a little bit. Do you want to tell us why PolitiCorey started and what made you want to get into this mess of a political commentary online?
Absolutely. It started back in 2020, like a lot of people, I think, that initially got into doing some sort of activity online or content creation during the pandemic. For me, I've always been interested in politics. I don't know if you've ever watched Succession, but I'm like Conor Roy. I was interested in politics from an early age. That's always my PR piece. But I was always interested. I always followed it keenly. But politics for a long, through my youth into my teenage years was relatively boring. People who were interested in politics were interested in it. There was some kind of memes about, Bertie Ahern and things where that would go mainstream. But in general, it was very much a niche subject of discussion. And in the last couple of years, it's exploded into like a total pop cultural phenomenon, but we can get into that. But basically around 2020, with the pandemic, with the introduction of, vaccine mandates, lockdowns, protocols, COVID vaccine passports, all this kind of stuff, there was a lot of information. There was a lot of things that people had to absorb super quickly. It was a situation that was extremely fast moving and changing. And people were trying to get a grasp on something that at the time, like people might look back and pretend like they didn't, but at the time, no one understood. No one knew what was happening, what was going on. I was living in Holland at the time and working over there, and I moved home because I believed it was like a plague. I better get home and say goodbye to my family for the last time, before they get taken away while I'm over here stuck in lockdown. So it was a lot of information coming out, and I found this industry start to build, which now, it's terrible to see what it's become. But this industry around people going online and building large followings on various social media platforms, basically just having an anti-establishment take on everything, whether it was the mask mandates, whether it was COVID, vaccine mandates, whether it was the lockdown. It was just I don't call it misinformation anymore because I feel like that word has been doctored. It's been basically stolen and manipulated so that if you say it, you're instantly dismissed as somebody who's like, just totally overreacting. I just think it's lies. I think these people that initially spread these, and we have sources that are, countrywide that I think a lot of this stuff comes from, and we can talk about Eastern Europe and the kind of way that supports the anti-Western movement in general, at least some of this stuff. But it became a huge industry where people were building these profiles off just lying about these sensationalized things, and you had a population that was super scared, super vulnerable, and very manipulatable. And they were, boy, were they manipulated by the kind of information that came out. And so I took it upon myself. I was somebody who worked in data at the time. So I worked in data, worked in research, and I did a lot of reading of papers, research papers, academic papers. And so I started reviewing a lot of the claims that were being made and going through it in a systematic way, like you said, in a data-driven way, going through the actual papers themselves, addressing concerns, trying to reference experts in the field, and trying to ground some of these claims around what the people who actually know about this stuff were saying. And a lot of the time you would see them directly countering the claims, because a lot of these claims became super, like we don't need to talk about like vaccines in general now suddenly are like a questioned, you have one half of the world, I've referenced this recently in a video, who believe, like me, vaccines are like a medical miracle and they're essential to the health of our population going forward. That's why we've lived so long. And that's created a lot of problems like in the health industry, but that's a different thing. And then you have people who believe that they're like systematic bioweapons that are implemented by governments who are elites to try and depopulate the earth. And you have like these two ideas commingling. And when I was younger, anti-vaccine sentiments were super niche. It was like believing in flat earth. Now it's like the most common thing in the world. I know several people that I'm quite close with that are staunch anti-vaxxers now after COVID. So I saw this. I thought it was a huge tragedy. I thought it was really obvious to me that this was obviously incorrect. There was obviously bad faith involved in why people were saying these things. They had other agendas like growing platforms and things like that. But it seemed like whatever the situation was with the population at the time, they were super susceptible to these ideas, and it's just exploded since then. So that was it. It was a tragedy of seeing the amount of lies that were spread about something that was so important to me. I have somebody in my life who is a high risk person, and so that made me keenly involved in the whole COVID pandemic, the mechanism of the virus, everything else. And so I had read a lot in the beginning when this first started. Hence why when I started to see things online, I was like, well, I know that's obviously wrong because I've done a bunch of reading about this because I have somebody that I care about that I want to make sure doesn't get exposed to this. And then it snowballed from there. And now we have like an entire huge industry. Now we have an administration in one of the largest countries in the world that's basically built off the back of misinformation and its power. And here we are.
And what would you say to people who would say they're not anti-vax or they're not pro-vax, but they feel like this is just me being playing devil's advocate, that the vaccines are in COVID, like, were rushed through and there was problems with it, and these problems aren't being, looked at in any way. They're just being sort of, some people believe that there needs to be more, research done into what exactly the effects of I know that by and large, I'm totally pro-vaccine by and large, but I always think that there's got to be transparency. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, like, are there issues? Were there issues? It's understandable as things are rushed through that, mistakes can happen, and that, I think, is feeding. There's been a vacuum created, and people are filling that vacuum with unhelpful information. Useful idiots, I call them, because they just get in the way, and they actually don't hold the government to account. They just distract.
100%. So I think you hit on something very critical to all of this. The majority of the people who are flag bearers for this stuff, or who end up being flag bearers for this stuff, I don't think are bad people or are intentionally trying to mislead people or carry this misinformation. But I think it starts with some kind of a truth or some kind of a pain that people are really experiencing. So in the case of the COVID vaccines, a novel vaccine that by all accounts was delivered in record time compared with normal vaccines, on like orders of magnitude faster than what a normal vaccine is in terms of testing. And it was during a pandemic where people are already scared about what the virus is going to do. As I said, fast-moving fast-moving information in general. And that's the perfect breeding ground for people to be, swayed either way. So I do think there's a legitimate concern there. But the answer to that is always in specificity. And with a lot of this stuff, we make a lot of general claims about these things when we should be talking about them at the granular level. So whatever your specific concern is, so whether it's, and we could spend a whole podcast talking about the actual vaccine program, the mechanism of the vaccine, why it was delivered faster than normal, what level of testing was involved. But all of this is easily dispelled by going to the academic research and going to the experts and hearing them talk about it. The problem is, like you said, there's this wide base of people who are concerned about something, reasonably concerned about something. And then you have the mechanism, the misinformation machine that comes into play. And suddenly what are slight concerns are blown up into huge problems. And people suddenly are told about problems that they weren't even worried about. They're worried about one small issue or worried about an issue. And now they've been told, geez, I didn't realize that actually it's this bad for you, or this many people are dying because of it. I was only concerned about, how quickly it was rushed through. So it's basically that, because of the machine. And I think all this is based on social media. Social media now is completely a runaway train, where it's like a petri dish for any sort of concern or worry in a population. There's a huge opportunity to go in there, turn on your camera, start your YouTube stream, and talk about all the ways the government is hiding X, Y, Z from you. Talk about all the ways, the big pharmaceutical companies are hiding X, Y, Z from you. And now suddenly you've created a nervous wreck in a person where they initially were just somewhat concerned. So I think a lot of people who carry water for these things aren't bad people and, don't want to be misinformed. But there's a lot of power behind the machine that is propping these people up that are misinforming them, and a lot of money to be made at that as well.
And then people would say that we just started up a YouTube account and we're talking about it, and we're probably spokespeople for the establishment,
Well, so again, this is what I'm saying about granularity. And this is like a meta conversation around the institutions of information that we all bow to. Because at the end of the day, when I was talking about vaccines and mask mandates and all these different things, these studies, I am not a primary source. I didn't conduct the research. I didn't guess, the test groups and, separate the control from the primary group, the variation. I'm relying on the expertise of people in those fields to deliver the information. And then I rely on myself and my ability to, analyze information and deliver it in some way. So at the core, we have to agree on what institutions of information do we agree are worthy of listening to. And I think that's the huge problem, is we've lost that trust for a huge amount of people in those institutions. And if you lose that, it doesn't matter who you are, how charismatic you are, or how well you deliver a message, or how well you succinctly read research papers and deliver it. People aren't going to listen. If they think it came from academia, I don't trust them. They're all up in an ivory tower and we know they've lied before. Or the government is telling you to do this. Therefore, because they're telling me to do it, just by that reason alone, I think it's not only do I not trust them, I think it's the opposite. I think they're actually hiding the inverse of what they're talking about. So at that point, once you've lost that, it's very, very difficult to bring that person back. So that's where it all has to come to, is showing why these things should be trusted.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I don't think, like, say, for instance, I'm not a big fan of the term mainstream media, but they haven't been covering themselves in glory, and people are picking holes in the stuff they're reporting on. And say, for instance, like, when I was a young man, the Irish Times was the paper of record, which we don't really seem to have a paper of record anymore. And that's just on the mainstream media side of things. So I don't know. I think you're getting more and more people distrusting scientists, papers, reports, and also I don't think novelty, like I used to work on breakfast radio, and you'd have these novelty surveys, and novelty surveys like, a glass of wine a day is good for you, a bar of chocolate a day is good for you, and then you kind of look into, you go, that actually survey was done if you go far enough back from the wine industry or whatever, or the chocolate industry, and I think those sort of like, PR surveys, novelty surveys, I really don't think they help either. It's that thirst for content, the thirst for novelty, the thirst for something new, the thirst to give some news. And so what you're seeing is, like, what was like a glass of wine a day is good for you is now becoming, you've got people going on what you might have deemed like, your breakfast television show or whatever, and going, vaccines, blah, blah, like that they're not even doing the research on those. So and also then your job, if it's not your job, what your job of trying to convince people or to trying to get, it's everybody's job, if they care, to try and get the correct information out there? How do you become that person that people trust? You're almost you're at a hiding to nothing, as my father-in-law used to say, because they're going to say, well, you're obviously being paid by them. Well, obviously the people who created the vaccine are going to say that. Well, obviously the tests are fixed. So it's almost impossible.
Well, I'm glad you didn't start recording before I was flashing my Lamborghini keys in front of the camera there that I picked up from Big Pharma for all the coverage. Yeah, that's a common complaint. It's like easily hand waved away that you're just getting paid for this information, which is, again, is an insight into the psyche of these people, that they believe the only way you could believe something is if you're being paid. They're so convinced of the opposite. But I think what you spoke to there is a phenomenon that's occurred, particularly in the last couple of years, around the blending of, there was like, you did breakfast radio, so when it comes to news and media, there's opinion media and there's editorial. And in newspapers, you have editorial, which is meant to be, objective information delivery. And then you have opinion, which is, somebody saying why they agree with something. Like Mike argued, opinion based. I'll read something and then I'll give my perspective on it and why I think it's right or wrong, good or bad. And that is very much blended now, where most people, and I think this is an education problem, I think a lot of this goes down to education. And you can track that in regions and countries where the education completion rate is lower, you have a higher uptake of the, accepting of these kind of ideas. Is the media literacy is extremely low. So we have a combination of the media literacy is bad, and also the media environment is bad, effectively, for want of a better term, where a lot of this information is swimming in the same pool. So I don't know what's an editorial piece from Reuters or the AP. I don't know why I should trust that more than something I saw on Facebook that seems to come from an independent media source, which, I assume they're funded in a better way, so I might be more likely to believe them. So you have that mixing of the different styles of media with a lack of media literacy. And so one person's Irish Independent back in the day is now another person's Irish Sun or Daily Mirror, or what have you, whatever piece you want to take. So that's, again, another foundational issue, is that people don't know how to discern types of media. And then also the media environment is just completely awash, because now there's so much money in being an independent commentator. And the best thing about being an independent commentator, if you're at the highest level, you're making a ton of money and you're doing it really well, is there's no accountability almost. There's effectively no accountability. If you think something wrong, something important wrong, you just turn the camera on again, like I said, and you continue streaming and you just move on to the next thing. Whereas the one thing I'll say about the mainstream media, and I have sympathy for them in one way, even though I don't think they're covering themselves in glory right now, in another way, I don't think that they push anywhere near hard enough in, trying to drill down to the truth, no matter whether they're interviewing politicians or doing these kind of things. It's very much like they're happy to be there and they're, riding the puff piece. I don't recognize the investigative journalism of today. But that's, the big issue is just that blending of the lack of accountability for these commentators and the level and the audience that they have. A media sort of company, if they get something wrong, generally they have to, post a retraction, or they have to come back online. That journalist's name is tied to whatever piece it is, and if they say something that's incorrect, you can draw it back. Now you have Twitter accounts like the Libs of TikTok, Radio Genoa, these things. Often Radio Genoa was some person living in the Philippines talking about American politics, and they're unknown, unnamed. I think Libs of TikTok has been unmasked since. There's a ton of these accounts. They have no accountability because you don't know who they are. You're not tracing it back to a real person. And they just pump so much misinformation and lies into the ecosphere. And on Twitter, these things are getting seen millions and millions of times because the likes of Elon Musk, he believes and agrees with those political positions. So he's boosting that. And so if they're wrong, it doesn't matter because it just moves on to the next day. So it's that mix. The media environment is completely blended. The media literacy is exceptionally low. And then the accountability for these people is non-existent. And so it's like a perfect machine to just explode this thing.
It is the perfect storm. I mean, going back to working on breakfast radio, you had tabloid and you had broadsheet. Within the broadsheet, then you had opinion, and the tabloid, you had opinion. But tabloid, we loved the tabloids because, the tabloid was like, Freddie Starr ate my hamster, and we loved those stories, those just like ridiculous, insane pieces. And we loved the nonsensical surveys. And
there's your segment covered for the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, am I too old to wear jeans? This kind of news, but now, because I think with the advent of media organizations fighting over eyeballs, basically, they were pushing, you'll see like the Irish Independent, you see like the Irish Times, you see these articles coming up or these questions appearing that it's clearly the name escapes me. A clickbait, yeah. Clickbait. It's such an old word. It's such an old term now, but it's clearly clickbait. And you're going, and with disbelief, you're going, oh, geez, not the Irish Times. Like, come on, just like a bit of the headline and then the information that you click through, and it's like, are we really doing that? So I do hope that. I do hope. I mean, what we're trying to do here in MOTH is just like talk about these things and try and like pull at the trends.
One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if it was a bug and it's amazing the source it came from. I remember on Twitter for like a week, they removed headlines. So if you posted a link in Twitter to post something, and normally you get that thumbnail screenshot and you get your headline. Again, I'm not sure what the design was behind this, because I certainly don't believe this is Elon Musk's motivation. But I thought it was an interesting idea of eliminating the headlines from social media posts, because I think the headlines do so much damage, like you said, because so often headlines are misleading and they're meant to deliver a sensationalist summary of something. And then when you go in to read the article, oftentimes it's not that way at all. I don't want to get the example wrong, but I remember there was coverage, Niall Boylan, classic Niall Boylan, was talking about how a judge had removed the rights of Irish citizens to protest in this case around an iPass centre, or what was going to be an iPass centre. But what the judge had done is they had ordered a particular space around the area had to be free for protesters, because the workers are being physically assaulted going into work every day, because obviously they were trying to stop them going in and working on this thing. And so Niall Boylan took what was a headline of, I can't remember exactly the paper, if it was tabloid or broadsheet, but it could, as you said, it could be either at this stage, in today's environment, and used the headline there to deliver the idea that a judge was removing the civil rights of Irish people. And it's all around this big idea of like the anti-establishment, look what they're trying to do to you. They're taking all your rights away and they're giving them to all these migrants who are coming here. And if you read the article, it was in black and white. I had a video about this as well several months ago. Niall Boylan's a huge culprit when it comes to this. It was in the article that it was a specific case order that they couldn't go within a certain amount of space within the workers because they were being physically harmed. They were allowed protest. They could protest, no problem. They just couldn't literally be on the line of the building site, stopping them from going in. And that, multiply that by 100, 1,000, and that's the kind of information that's getting spread into the ecosphere all the time. And people who are just skimming headlines are going, "Oh, that must be the case," because nobody has time. Who has time on a social media phone-driven era to actually go in and read the article? Why would you do that? Because you're going from TikTok back to Instagram onto Facebook. Oh, I see this thing. Send it on WhatsApp. Put it into your WhatsApp group. Guys, what do you think about this? And everyone reads the headline, and then they all share it somewhere else. And it's just this memification of information. It's just nobody has the patience or the time or the attention span to go and, I better read this and see, is there something beyond the headline? So I think that's also, you are identifying a lot of problems here, but I do think they're all very important.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. I do, I know that, I worked with a guy who was very diligent and I wasn't very diligent. So I'd see something in the paper and I'd be like, oh my God, this is great. This would be a great, little thing. And then he'd read down to the end of the article. He'd go, hang on, that's not actually what the thing is. And I'd be like, oh, fuck off, shut up. And then we just couldn't.
Yeah, because it's not fun. That's the truth. It is not fun. And I often get that feeling as being that person online. You're kind of the guy that they don't want to invite to the party. It's like, oh, you brought fucking him. We can't have any crack.
I have a friend.
Tell us all wrong. Yeah. It is not fun to be that guy. 100%.
I have a friend who will be the person at a party, and when there's conversation around Israel or whatever, and will come in and go and correct people, and she'd often say, people would turn to her and go, "Oh, give it a rest," as in, you're ruining the crack of the conversation and the outrage by just bringing it back to the truth and what's actually happening, and the death and destruction, or just the honest truth, or the facts.
Yeah.
You just what are you and your fucking facts?
There's an NBA analyst called Jalen Rose. He's an ex-player, and he used to be a co-host of a podcast I listened to, and he summarized it really well, and it was obviously related to America, but it was very true. And he said how since the advent of Google, it ruined arguments. He said when they were in the barbershop, what they used to do is they'd have arguments about some matter of fact, and it was completely exaggerated. So both sides were exaggerating their side to the nth degree, and it made for a fantastic argument. And really heated and everyone would get involved and it was really passionate. But then once Google came and you could whip the phone out and just Google it and be like, oh, you're wrong, it's on Google. It just sucked the fun out of everything. And so that's part of it as well, is for a lot of these people, it's just kind of not fun so much, but it's more entertaining to engage in this kind of, information sharing than it is to go, I'm going to put my glasses on and be the Poindexter and like fact check. And, the meme of like the source guy, I'm the source guy, whatever. Yeah. It's not cool to be that guy at all. And I do think there's a place for that. And I don't think we should suck the fun out of all of the, sharing misinformation and sharing of memes and different things that have less of an impact in society. But I feel like it's become, there just needs to be barriers. Like in a bowling alley, you need to have the barriers up because too often the balls are going into the gutters and it's leading to a terrible game for everyone. And soon the whole bowling alley is going to be in bits because no one will be able to play because it'll have gone so bad. So within its lane, I think you need to keep that there. You don't need everything to be fact checked to the nth degree, but there does need to be some barriers so that we do go too far on one side where we may cause civil unrest or something really important is going to be spread as a lie about something that people need to do. That's where some mechanism has to come into play. And I don't know if it's legislation at the EU level. I have some thoughts around what we could do around social media, and the practicality of that would remain to be seen. But I think that while we're missing those, I think we do have to be extra careful about being that fact-checking person and to not let an idea that is false, disseminate too far.
Yeah, because nobody minds having the crack when it comes to like the fact that the Lewis is free, and or stuff that just is absolutely not true. And also, I remember there was great fun around the those WhatsApp voice notes that were going around during COVID about my neighbor's, husband works in the army and they're moving in.
The tanks are about to roll out. Yeah,
tanks are about to roll out, and
any minute.
And people doing their versions of those, which was absolutely hilarious. So sometimes the best way to deal with those things is just through comedy because it's so ridiculous. But there's so much that's so ridiculous that some of it's people are just thinking some of it's got to be true, and it is leading to like you see it on X all the time. It's like a picture of a well-known presenter from the 6 o'clock show or something, and they'll be like, you would not believe what this presenter from the 6 o'clock show did, and their wife is in tears or whatever. It's clickbait, but it's like, but everything looks like clickbait, and even that, or someone's dead, and you're like, what? Jack Black is dead? It's everything's so ridiculous and so just out of left field, and it is constant that it's. I think. I mean, it probably will be a good time to briefly touch on. I know you've spoken about, and I agree with you. Having ID, like having to have your passport or something associated with your account when you're online. And I think that's a really clear, obvious way to just deal with this issue. And I wonder, will a platform do it?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the practicality. I understand the idea or the benefit, the merit behind being able to have like a somewhat anonymized presence online, and I get all the arguments for that. And again, with all this stuff, we have a problem with like utopiaizing these things where if it's not a perfect solution, we shouldn't do it. Like if it doesn't solve every problem in society, we shouldn't do it. So obviously there's some issues downstream. Like I said about potentially prosecuting, lies that are spread to a high level to a lot of people online. There's problems with that, obviously. But to me, the problems of not doing that are far worse. And it comes to that when it comes to ID. I think, again, that's like a steroid or an accelerator to this misinformation machine, is that you're able to, I just think accountability and consequence is like what Mike Tyson used to say, that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. There's a level of detachment that people have online now where they'll say and do and disseminate anything because they don't fear any consequence and they don't fear anything to come back to them because it's a Twitter account on a VPN and they can just delete it and get rid of it if they need to and start a new one. Or, it's a fake TikTok account, masked account that they're using to harass somebody or to disseminate whatever. We've seen these, like I see these all the time, these like era firsts and stuff that are coming up that I see all the time now that are just pumping out the same content with the same, idea. And I think once you start having people's names attached to what they're talking about, suddenly they're going to be a lot closer to reality, and they're going to be a lot more, these barriers are going to suddenly start existing because you have like social pressures when it comes to this stuff, that if you're out there putting a certain idea out there, you're going to have friends, family, you're going to have jobs, you're going to have, these different things, organizations that you're in, clubs that are going to kind of center you. Because I really believe in the power of the wisdom of numbers, where like at a societal level, I think when you have true representative democracy, we generally move in the right direction. And I think we've seen that in the West particularly. When you give people the power to exert their voice and their opinion, and you do it in a truly representative way, we move in a good direction. And so if you do that, those pressures exist, and that's why people's kind of generally the sea seems to swim in the direction that we should be going. But because you have this lack of accountability and you have this kind of unfettered just spill of anonymous information, there is never that consequence at the end of the day. So that's a long-winded way to say I think a lot of the stuff would be greatly resolved if you had to stand behind your words, which I do. My face is on camera. I talk about things. Everyone knows my name. And if somebody disagrees with me, they know I'm the person that said it. I'm not some random account that's just going to lie about it the next day. And, people still talk about things that I said during COVID, where people will comment on videos completely unrelated on politics in Ireland about, oh, you said X thing about vaccines back then. Do you feel bad? Here's this study, whatever. Because I'm accountable for everything I said.
People know. Yeah, people can come back to you. Yeah.
And I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I've even also with people, family members, whatever, even when I'm speaking up for immigrants or whatever, people might say, do you really want to be, do you really want to put yourself in that position? So like everybody will have an opinion and will have something to say to you. If you feel embarrassed about it, you'll stop doing it. Are you okay for time? Are we okay for another?
100%. Yeah. All good.
So let's talk about the most recent thing. So two examples. The first one, poor old Garda Kevin Flatley, a tragic accident, but the online misinformation distorted that story and really caused a lot of distress. And so much so the Gardaí had to come out and say, look, there's a lot of fake narratives around this. And what's your take on this particular story? And I mean, I think we know how these things gain traction, I mean, it's hard to figure out really the reason behind this one, but I suppose it's anti-establishment really. So this particular story, tell me what you think.
I think it's exactly a model of the world that we live in now, where I believe this machine that I talk about, this misinformation, this lie machine, is fully operational now. And all you need to do is feed a story into it, and the machine takes care of the rest. And it's perfectly set up. It's Garda, for the most part, for a lot of these people, particularly these like anti-establishment, Ireland first, anti-immigration people. They don't trust the government. They don't trust the guards. Any symbol of authority, they generally have problems with. There's sectors of society that make up a large, proportion of these groups that have other reasons for distrusting Garda. Coming from more impoverished backgrounds, more dealings with guards, more likely to be involved in crime, etc., etc. We can go into the sociology of that. So it's a guard, and it's a symbol of authority in a world that's anti-establishment, and then you have this machine where, because it's a guard, and somebody comes up, and I don't know what the motivation is for this originally, or why is it just to sow discontent and dissent among the ranks, or because I know a lot of this stuff originates, at least in America and Canada and kind of these more large Western nations. A lot of this stuff originates from Russia, where they'll have these like farms, misinformation farms, where they'll come up with concepts and they'll basically flood the zone with those. They get picked up then by the real anti-establishment people, although there's a lot of bots there that claim to be of that group. And then, they turn it into this like huge thing. So somebody started the idea that this guard actually was acting like a lunatic who was unhinged, who, was having a break from reality and was crossing the road multiple times. And effectively, the idea there underneath it is that he deserved to die and that we should actually feel bad for the biker. And I saw a lot of that commentary. Oh, I hear nothing about the biker. The guard was acting like a lunatic, and now the biker might die. And it's this idea again of like the people, being victim of the establishment and authority. And again, like I said, I can't get into the mind psychologically of somebody who starts that story. The same with, as you referenced the start, the Mullabon story. I don't know why you would ever initially set that up. But with the setup now, with WhatsApp, with social media, with these like Telegram groups that are private, these things move so much faster than the media can and the guards can, because the guards and the media generally are beholden to reality. And unfortunately, that involves getting the CCTV, getting dash cam footage, interviewing people that might have been there at the time, reviewing it, and then coming up with a concrete conclusion at the end. They have these investigations they're beholden to, because it involves the courts and involves legal prosecutions and everything. But if you're one of these misinformation groups, cells in these Telegram and WhatsApp groups, you can move that information so fast. Next thing, it's on TikTok. Within 4 or 5 hours, this story is out there everywhere that the Guard is acting like this. And how long does it take for the Guards to eventually, they had to like put out an interim statement to say it's incorrect. We haven't determined exactly what it is yet, but what they're saying isn't true, because they have to get ahead of it.
But of course the Guards are going to say that. That's the answer, That's the
Again, this is where we go back to these institutions of truth. At the end of the day, my belief is that if the Guards are going to come out with something that is demonstrably false, what they have to do is they have to convince all of the members of the force that are involved in that investigation or have any connection to it at all to agree. They have to, get the family to sign on to that idea. They have to get government officials and court officials and legal, professionals to sign on to this idea who are involved in the case, who see the evidence. The coroner who has to, review the damage of the body. They have to get all these people to sing off the same hymn sheet, that all have their own motivations, that all have different reasons for maybe being the Guards or whatever else. But these people view them as like just a hive mind. They're all the establishment. They all have the exact same motivation, and they all will lie in unison. So I believe that these people are individuals who have loads of different reasons for being in establishment, in the government, and whatever the organization might be, and that you're just not going to get all of them to sing off the same hymn sheet, which is such an obvious, erroneous lie. So that's why I would always say that I defer to these institutions when I say, and again, like I said, it may come out that there's more to the story. I know people were saying, they said he may have stepped out to the fast lane or the road to actually stop the bike. Some of that stuff might be possible. Maybe that's like sometimes in the protocol for the Guards to maybe, put half the stuff out. So that could happen. But it's the idea that it's always taken to this extreme that, it's a lunatic running across the road. Same with the Mullabon thing. I always, and this is the problem, if you want to be somebody who's a truth teller, is I generally reserve judgment on these things, even though I know it's most likely lies, just because these people have form and they constantly do it. Until I actually know the facts of the case, I'll rarely go out and say, this isn't true. I'll usually say, the Guards came out and they gave a statement, and I'll say, I trust an institution, so I'm willing to stake, whatever reputation I have with my small account, that if it comes out that it's actually false, the Guards were lying, I'll stand on that, and I'll say, I didn't think the Guards were going to lie, because I don't believe they won't. And that's the difference.
And I totally agree with you, and I agree with you in that the Gardaí can't come out with a statement so quickly. Everybody has to be in agreement. It has to be pretty much. Oh, they're coming to get me now.
You said too much.
A big issue for establishment Ireland, for the government, is how they treat. Let's call them whistleblowers. I don't love the term whistleblowers. They're just people going, here, listen, this is shit. I think whistleblowers actually puts them in for people. I think it puts them in a space that takes away their legitimacy. So if you talk about this defer, deny, delay tactic of the government, so that when people do come out with something about the care system, we spoke to somebody about the care system and treatment within the care system during COVID and all this kind of stuff, and how things did happen, and it's like we're running out of carpet here with the amount of stuff we put brushed under the carpet in this country. Is defer, deny, and I think that does not help them when it comes to, it doesn't help the Gardaí coming out with statements, because they're going, well, they're just, these guys are likely to say. I think my take on it would be legal firms, institutions are advising government departments to act in this way, to push people away. People looking for truth around what happened during COVID in care homes were being called, a couple of ministers and a Taoiseach, I think, even said this is a witch hunt. So when we're treating our own citizens and their search for truth and transparency with that disregard and this idea of push it down the line, deny, blah, 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 that really doesn't help them. If you're talking about institutions of, people we can depend on for the truth, that really doesn't help it. I don't think. I don't even know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And obviously my ideals are, if you have cases like this, I believe in independent review, third parties coming in to review cases like this. I think obviously if you make an organization responsible for investigating itself, you're going to create incentives there that are bad for them, coming to the truth. However, there can be, again, going back to the utopiaism claim before, there can be problems with, and you should never defer all authority to organizations. You should always have some healthy skepticism. But the answer to that is not to believe everything they say is a lie, or believe anything they say can be a lie. So I think we need to have more mature kind of views around when these institutions lie, when they have bad incentives. Like, I have a whole kind of disagreement with a lot of the like left wing of the Irish politics as well, as it pertains to the housing situation, how the politicians are incentivized to continue that and different things there. And I just think there has to be meat in the bone when you're making claims that these ranks are, obviously there's some conspiracy within them there. So I do think it happens, but I think we have to, have credible meat in the bone there before we're going to claim it. And I definitely think the answer is for sure not to just have no faith in the institutions whatsoever, because I think that leads us into a way more dangerous path than believing them. If we believe them all the time, they'll sometimes harm us and we might ignore it. But if we never believe them, I think that's the recipe for like total societal collapse.
Yeah, and I just think that we've used this this way of dealing with problems and issues that arose as this wholesale across so much that almost everybody in the country has been affected by this, bringing a complaint to an institution and it being denied or delayed, or and I just think we've done it so much that it's actually just added. It's just people just have so many reasons not to believe, and we should try and believe.
I think with stuff like this, like
as much as we can, but I just I don't think as a country we're helping ourselves, because ultimately the government are there to help the people and help the country and housing and all that kind of stuff, and they just seem to be getting in the way of doing getting in their own way, and to what end,
I think we need to. So with stuff like this, if I'm going to speak to it, I always want to ground it in like specific examples. So I like to, focus on a specific case. Maybe we can, do that at some point in the future. We can take two.
I'd love that. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
On the opposite side, we're talking very much about this kind of like anti-establishment, why that's bad. But I think it's very fair to go, okay.
And I'm asking the questions of the person who might watch this and go,
why we should also review why being like an establishment shill can be bad and like what the problems are there. But I want to ground it in specific cases, because again, I think every case is distinct and unique, and I think it's important that we identify this kind of 3D protocol or framework that they might use, how that actually happened in each case. And I don't want to speak to a generality,
of course,
like that. Again, I don't want to come across as an establishment shill, but I think in general, with all this stuff, we need to be example based.
I think it's important to have balanced conversations like this as well. That I'm putting something to you. It's not that I'm accusing you of being a shill. I'm just this is what people say. This is the way the conversation.
All right, I get double pay if I have to directly defend the establishment.
Yeah, well, you're getting money from obviously the housing department, and also getting money from the big pharma as well. So, how many Ferraris have you got? So very very quickly then, I know you have to get back to work. The Mullabon thing. There was a story going around about a young woman, 21 years of age, had been kidnapped, was held captive for a week or something, ran into a pub, looking disheveled, bedraggled, in a lot of distress, ran to a pub, and then the story was that she'd been held captive by, what do people call them? Illegal immigrants, non-nationals, foreigners, whatever.
Yeah, I think we need to, if we're going to have a future conversation, I think one thing I'd love to focus on is those distinctions of actual immigrants in the country. What is an illegal immigrant? All this stuff we can talk about. That's a very erroneously.
There's no such thing. There is no such thing. But,
correct,
these terms, pick one you want. They're all bad. And this was like, and it was amazing how this grew legs, and it was like a voice note that someone had sent to somebody else, saying this happened, and there was no evidence of it. There was no missing person file. There was no, I believe the PSNI, I think both the Garda and the PSNI looked into it and said, no, they did find a woman who was in distress, but there was nothing about a kidnapping. And there was certainly no talk of anybody, I don't know how to say this, but someone who had recently moved to the country, either asylum seekers or whatever, like all of that. There seemed to be a woman who was in distress. She may have come into a pub in Drogheda, and the rest was fabricated.
The rest, again, like I said, it was a perfect prime story for the machine. Everything now is colored with this view that the majority of the problems and cases of violence that are existing in Ireland are based on this mass migration, and it's become the calling card for all of these movements across Europe and the US less so. They have their own kind of immigration argument about Mexico. But in the West, this like idea from the Middle East and these like Islamic nations and stuff and these people coming over, this is like the perfect recipe. So again, the psychology of the person who initially disseminates that. I don't know if this is a case where we have some, group within this movement that are looking for opportunities to disseminate this kind of information. And it may be the case that they think, because I know there was a case of a woman who was prosecuted for lying about being sexually assaulted by one of these people. Yeah. And the idea behind it, her excuse was, this case was a lie, but I know it's happening. And so I thought I'd sacrifice myself, for the movement, and I'd further the conversation. So maybe that's the motivation for all this stuff, is that, here's like I said, I think Russia does the same thing. Our goal is to achieve, a rejection of this mass migration and this kind of, globalist agenda that the West now has. In pursuit of that goal, it's okay to blur the line somewhat, because at the end of the day, the ends are going to justify the means. So we can lie to get to the goal because the goal is a righteous one.
Yeah, that didn't specifically happen, but like it's happened all the time.
Yeah, so I put my hands up. We were wrong this time, but the only reason we were, incorrect to begin with, and the reason why we thought it, because we knew of these cases that happened elsewhere that were very similar. So we did some heuristic. Now I don't think they'd use any of that language, but they'd say we jumped the gun a little bit to get there, but we have good reason to think it. And again, like I said at the time, there was a lot of information coming out. People were making these like news. People claiming to be like news, coverage, the independent news. I'm on the ground. We're all coming out with the same thing. And it was all just based off the WhatsApp note. They were all sharing the same source of information. There was no corroborating information. Again, good investigative journalism involves corroborating sources, going to the various parties involved, whether it's locals or whether it's the guards or whoever, and confirming or validating information you have. But it doesn't happen like that on TikTok or on Twitter. You get the voice note, that's all you need, because you're going to get thousands of views if your story or your video or your tweet hits and people suddenly start sharing it. So you don't care about verifying the information. You just want to be one of the people in the mix. And so I was seeing that's like the most frustrating thing to me, even if, like I said, my understanding as well right now is that, she turned up at the bar. There was no charges, brought against anyone. Someone did apparently enter the bar who was a man who people were claiming was a migrant. He apparently wasn't a migrant, and no charges were set against him, because some people were saying, he was actually a boyfriend who, and again, this is like, they're trying to like normalize it a little bit, but they were still saying things that I don't know if were true. It was a boyfriend that was abusing the woman, and he'd come in together, but there was no charges raised against him. Now that doesn't mean that he wasn't an abusive boyfriend and she just didn't raise the charges, but we just don't have the facts on the ground yet.
Yeah, we just don't have the facts.
When you wait for that, a lie makes it halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on. And so this is the problem with this whole mechanism. So again, it's just perfect soil for this ground. And the people who are already anxious about this kind of thing, in this case, immigration, pick your issue, are just going to immediately sign on to it. And they're going to be super susceptible to it. And I don't know if it's like some mass hysteria, mass hypnosis, but it feels like people's brains are so much more malleable now to this information on social media, and they're just easily swayed.
Yeah, because Johnny's going to sit down with the missus at tea time and go, did you see that thing that happened in Drogheda? And I think, for me personally, I think the truth needs to stop trying to put its pants out on and just go nude, just to get out there sooner.
I agree for that.
There's so much we could talk forever. There's so much. I definitely like to get you on and talk specifics, and you can show us how this all works from start to finish and break it down for us. It'd be great, Corey. I'll let you go. I know you have actual work to do for Big Pharma, and
I got to ring my handlers now and tell them how the call went. Tell them everything was okay. I did my best to defend them, get another gold star. I think I'm at 7 now. When I get 10, I get a free coffee in the Dáil. So
Shields of Us, I think, is the organization.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the payment system. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Keith. And I'm more than happy to talk about any specific case. I think there's a lot to get through, a lot of meat in the bone, and I think that there's not enough people taking the time out to try and combat some of this stuff. It can feel like a bit of a tsunami of misinformation here. That I've been guilty of that as well, thinking that it was pointless to do anything in the face of it. But I really think that we have a civil or civic responsibility to, where we are aware of it, to do what we can to try and dispel it.
Just to create spaces where people can talk honest and openly, and then everyone else can sort of
correct and come with your concerns. This is no claim that you can't have a specific opinion about any kind of broader topic that are broached by these other movements. but let's have it in a transparent way where we're grounded in reality. And if you don't trust the sources of reality from someplace or where else, let's find out why. Let's talk about and find the source of that.
Yeah, it'd be much easier for me to just get angry with you for saying something I didn't agree.
You get a lot more clicks as well and a lot more views, but we're not in the business of that. We're in the business of truth.
Exactly. Listen, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. PolitiCorey, have a good day.
Much respect, Keith. Talk to you soon.
Good luck, man. Bye. There you have it. That's PolitiCorey, and he has to get back to the day job. But yeah, look, these are conversations we need to be having, and I mean, it's true. If we'd had a row and I, kicked him off or something, we'd get more clicks and maybe we'd be more successful faster. But actually, this is about building something here on MOTH. You want to build something real, something long-lasting, something that's actually helpful. Conversations with people about their treatment in care homes, and as Corey said, like the specifics. Let's get to the specifics and talk about the specifics. And if somebody, doesn't matter what country they lived in this year, last year, whether they're Irish, whether they're not Irish, if a man does something and it's illegal, he should be prosecuted. And that's what we should be doing. I don't really care where someone's from. If they break the law, they break the law. If you're abusing women, you're abusing women. It doesn't matter where you're from. And this conversation around non-nationals or asylum seekers or illegal immigrants, which there's no such thing, it just doesn't help us help the people who are currently trying to live and do things in this country, get things done. This is I want to play this clip. This is a young man who does a lot of good work on TikTok, and he's talking about specifically about the Mullabon incident. He used a lot of the terms I wouldn't necessarily use, but he's entitled to his own. We're not going to.
The far-right and anti-immigrant mob are out in force today with complete and utter fabricated stories about a 21-year-old Drogheda woman who was apparently kidnapped 3 weeks ago by a group of foreign nationals, raped, starved and beaten, but who escaped and went to a pub and asked for help. Their evidence? Far-right enthusiasts sent voice notes via WhatsApp to other far-right enthusiasts. That's it. The police in Northern Ireland have said yes, they went to Mullabon. There was a woman in distress, but there's no evidence of criminal activity. There's no missing person report from Drogheda. There's nothing from An Garda Síochána. And locals from Mullabon themselves have said that this is a complete fabrication. They made it all up. Why? Because fear is their only tactic. Evidence and facts do not exist for these fucksticks.
That is Paddy the Panda, and he's News with Paddy the Panda is his TikTok if you want to follow him. I would call them fucksticks. But also, far-right enthusiasts, definitely there's a far-right element spreading these stories. The difficulty for me is that, as I mentioned, like Johnny sits down at tea time and he's seen this, he's seen this on social media, or he's been sent it to WhatsApp, and he says it to the missus. And he's simply saying, God, did you hear about that poor woman in Drogheda? Apparently it was an asylum seeker or whatever. And those people aren't far right. They're not far right enthusiasts. They're people who are going about their day. But it is developing this racist view, racist gaze in the country, and a lot of what you're getting is a lot of innocents sharing this propaganda that is anti-immigrant. And I think, and I've done it myself before, I have sort of accused just regular focus was just people going about their business and hearing a story and sharing it. That's what I've called them far right or right wing, but I don't think they would even know that they're far right or right wing. They're just sharing something that they saw, that they've been disturbed by, and rightly so. And as I said, if somebody did kidnap a young woman and hold her hostage for a week, that person should be, if it was true, but regardless of where they're from. That's the point. Crime is there are reasons why certain things are legal. We definitely should be in this country trying to move on from our old ways and make sure that women feel safe in this country. And they don't not feel safe because of men who moved here recently. I can tell you that for nothing. Anyway, that's it for today. We could be back tomorrow or the next day. We're planning on doing a series of interviews with people who have had difficult experiences with family members or themselves in care homes in Ireland pre and since COVID. Doesn't seem to be getting any better, so we'll be bringing some of those conversations to you as we organise the interviews and lots more besides. So keep it here on MOTH News Live, and we'll try and bring you the facts as we see them, as we know them to be, and we'll have people. I mean, I did want to mention People Before Profit, which Corey wouldn't be his politics, but we can also have Paul Murphy, People Before Profit on, and we can have Corey on. They don't agree with each other. Myself, other presenters, Al, Phil, we don't agree with each other, but it's a space where people can talk and then other people can decide. It's just about getting the information out there. I need to stop banging that because that's my microphone. Anyway, have a good day and peace out. Stay cool and be nice to each other. You know, kindness. That's the way forward, folks. Good luck.